Blake Lively is in complete meltdown after a fearless Hollywood reporter decided to drop a truth bomb that exposed her like never before. What seemed like a simple illustration cover turned out to be a brutal takedown wrapped in glossy print. And no doubt she's been hit with backlash before, but this one is an absolute career-ending territory. And it all happened on the Hollywood Reporter's cover on February 22nd, a masterpiece that single-handedly dismantled Blake Lively's entire act. The image was an absolute gold that portrayed her launching a slingshot at Justin Baldoni, because apparently, we're back in medieval times where legal disputes are settled with cartoon weapons. If her goal was to make her look completely ridiculous, mission accomplished. Instead of standing her ground like an adult, Blake is now immortalized in a scene. Blake's team wasted no time throwing a fit, slamming the cover as sexist. Because, of course, everything is sexist when you're losing. Their complaint stated that the illustration played into negative stereotypes about women who speak out. But let's be real. If you're calling a drawing your biggest battle, maybe your case isn't as strong as you think. Instead of bringing actual receipts, they went straight for the classic outrage playbook, hoping the internet would rally behind them. Instead, people are now laughing at the sheer irony of someone who constantly preaches about strong, independent women, only to crumble over a magazine cover. And the best part? The article didn't stop at the hilarious artwork. It went deeper, much deeper. It highlighted Justin Baldoni's Baha'i faith, which, in the grand scheme of things, suggested that this entire mess wasn't about clear-cut harassment at all. Instead, it painted a picture of a cultural misunderstanding blown completely out of proportion. Her team's response was classic deflection. Instead of providing actual proof to back up her claims, they went full attack mode on the Hollywood Reporter, acting as if questioning Blake's version of events was some kind of crime. No facts, no new evidence, just pure, unfiltered outrage. They expected the public to blindly support her, but all they did was make it painfully obvious how thin her entire argument really was. If there was ever a moment to step back and rethink the strategy, this was it. But instead, she chose to dig herself into an even deeper hole. By throwing Baldoni's religious background into the mix, the report shifted the conversation in a way that completely undercut Blake's narrative. Instead of letting people assume the worst about Baldoni, it forced them to consider the possibility that his actions weren't malicious at all, just misunderstood through Hollywood's hypersensitive lens. And rather than even considering this as a valid perspective, Blake did what she does best: played the victim, ignored nuance, and stuck to the script. The problem now is that the audience isn't buying it anymore. At this point, every detail of this scandal just cements how painfully unserious Blake Lively has become. Her team's constant outbursts baseless accusations, and desperate attempts to control the narrative scream damage control on steroids. But the harder they try, the worse it gets. Instead of proving she deserves the respect she demands, Blake is exposing herself as someone who simply can't handle reality. And the irony, the more she tries to escape the scrutiny, the more she becomes its main event. And do you know the public once had blind faith in Blake Lively? But that loyalty evaporated the moment glaring inconsistencies started surfacing in her story. Instead of standing firm, she conveniently removed key text messages from her amended lawsuit. Messages that, if left intact, would have completely shattered her narrative. This wasn't just an innocent tweak. It was a calculated move to erase the cracks in her allegations, a desperate attempt to keep the illusion alive. But rather than securing her case, this strategic omission only set off alarms, making it painfully obvious that the truth wasn't exactly on her side. Media outlets wasted no time ripping her claims apart like vultures on a carcass. Every new headline became another blow to her credibility, exposing her accusations as nothing more than a fragile web of selective storytelling. The more she tried to dictate the narrative, the more the media demonstrated that her legal strategy was as unstable as a house of cards in a hurricane. At this point, it's less of a case and more of a theatrical production, with Blake scrambling to keep the spotlight where she wants it, anywhere but on the facts. Legal analysts have been watching this circus unfold, and let's just say, they're not impressed. Rather than presenting a solid, evidence-backed case, Blake keeps shifting her approach like a magician pulling new tricks out of a hat. Every sudden pivot feels less like a well-thought-out strategy and more like a frantic attempt to cover her own missteps. The constant legal flip-flopping only makes it clearer that she's out of her depth, relying on smoke and mirrors instead of actual facts. If her credibility wasn't already hanging by a thread, her erratic legal tactics are practically cutting that thread with a chainsaw. Meanwhile, Justin Baldoni's team has been methodically dismantling every accusation with cold, hard facts. No speculation, no vague claims, just concrete evidence that directly contradicts Blake's version of events. This isn't a battle of opinions anymore. It's a straight-up reality check. And as Baldoni's receipts keep stacking up, Blake's case is starting to look less like a pursuit of justice and more like a desperate attempt to control the story. And then there's social media, where the tables have turned so fast, Blake must have whiplash. What started as unwavering support has mutated into relentless backlash. Memes, sarcastic commentary, and ruthless critiques have turned her legal drama into one giant internet punchline. People aren't just questioning her claims anymore, they're outright mocking her every move. Instead of rallying behind her, the online community is dragging her narrative through the mud, making it clear that her attempt to control the conversation has completely backfired. To make things even worse, Blake's legal team pulled a last-minute stunt, filing an amended complaint just before the deadline, a move that reeked of sheer desperation. Instead of clarifying anything, they padded the lawsuit with even more vague defamation claims, doubling down on painting Baldoni as the villain in this already absurd drama. And in a flimsy attempt to bolster her case, they threw in claims that other women on set felt uncomfortable, but of course, with no actual details or specifics. At this point, the lawsuit is starting to feel like one long, exaggerated monologue with zero substance. Every new twist in this spectacle of incompetence just cements Blake Lively's reputation as a manipulative actress who thrives on deception. The endless legal maneuvers, the blatant lack of transparency, the constant attempts to rewrite reality, all of it adds up to one thing. This isn't about justice, it's about control. And as much as she tries to twist the story in her favor, the cracks in her performance are too big to ignore. The fact that these texts were deleted speaks volumes about the inherent fragility of her narrative. Some of the removed messages explicitly suggest that her team inflated their claims far beyond what the facts could support. Rather than presenting a coherent case, Blake opted to sanitize her own records in a desperate bid to maintain control over a story that is rapidly unraveling. These deleted messages, which Baldoni's team has already provided context for, leave no doubt that her narrative is built on shaky grounds. This omission is not merely a minor oversight, but a glaring red flag that undermines the entire foundation of her allegations. Legal experts wasted no time in pointing out that the removal of such evidence was not an innocent mistake. It was a calculated move designed to obscure the weaknesses in her case. They argue that the absence of these texts fuels speculation that Blake's claims are much weaker than initially presented. The very act of deleting critical evidence suggests a deep-seated insecurity about the veracity of her allegations. It is as if she knows that when confronted with the truth, her story would collapse into a heap of inconsistencies and outright fabrications. This maneuver, in all its clumsy audacity, further tarnishes her reputation and reinforces the narrative that she is nothing more than a desperate actress grasping at straws. While Blake was busy erasing inconvenient truths, Justin Baldoni's defense mounted a robust counterattack. His team fought back aggressively against every one of her baseless allegations, leaving no stone unturned. With a formidable legal strategy, Baldoni's camp systematically provided documented evidence that directly contradicts her claims. His lawyer, Brian Friedman, renowned for his aggressive litigation style, has been instrumental in dismantling the flimsy arguments put forth by Blake's team. It is a clear display of legal prowess, as Friedman and his team maintain that Baldoni's actions were misinterpreted rather than inappropriate, and they have produced an impressive array of texts, calls, and emails that support his version of events. Sources close to the case reveal that Baldoni possesses extensive evidence, including crucial communications, proving his conduct was entirely professional. Every piece of evidence stands as a testament that his behavior was simply misunderstood by an overzealous team eager to manufacture a scandal. While Blake desperately tries to pin every issue on a so-called cultural clash, her narrative falls apart under the weight of hard, incontrovertible evidence. The robust defense from Baldoni's camp clearly demonstrates that his actions were misinterpreted, not malicious. Their legal strategy focuses on proving defamation and reputational damage, effectively turning the tables by exposing the broader agenda behind her claims.
But girl, they are your fault.
Her inability to embrace different cultural expressions is as transparent as it is hypocritical. While Baldoni's affectionate demeanor, marked by his habit of offering warm hugs and displaying open emotion, is simply his way of connecting with people, Blake sees any such behavior as an affront to her warped sense of decorum. Some colleagues even described his actions as caring and supportive, yet others, blinded by their own rigid expectations, found them uncomfortable. Instead of engaging with the possibility that these differences might be perfectly normal in a diverse environment, Blake seizes on the discomfort to falsely allege misconduct. The very idea that a cultural misunderstanding could justify her outrage only underscores how little substance there is in her argument. Adding insult to injury, reports reveal that Blake Lively exerted an iron grip over the production, orchestrating a power struggle that left little room for genuine creative collaboration. Far from being a collaborative force, she allegedly made multiple arbitrary demands regarding the script and the filming process. With her star power as her weapon, she forced decisions to bend to her will, micromanaging every detail as if the project existed solely for her benefit. It is a classic display of authoritarian behavior, where control is hoarded at the expense of actual productivity. The amended complaint, which she later downplayed, is nothing more than a desperate attempt to sanitize her record, even as the evidence of her tyrannical tactics becomes undeniable. Her legal team claims that her actions were intended to create a safe work environment, yet the reality is that every decision she imposed was a calculated maneuver to assert dominance. Baldoni's team counters this narrative by exposing how her safety measures were merely a cover for her obsessive need to control every aspect of the production. The final version of the film bears the unmistakable mark of her interference, a series of forced changes that speak to her overbearing presence rather than to any genuine concern for the crew's well-being. Instead of fostering a creative and respectful atmosphere, she turned the set into her personal dictatorship, all in a misguided effort to rewrite the narrative in her favor.
This maximum effort could have been taken over.
The stark contrast between Baldoni's respectful, culturally enriched approach and Blake's aggressive, dictatorial behavior is undeniable. His actions, characterized by authentic displays of emotion and cultural expression, were interpreted by some as merely unconventional. Meanwhile, Blake's relentless control and arbitrary demands reveal a manipulative force determined to impose her own vision regardless of merit. Her constant need to micromanage every detail rather than working cooperatively only highlights the pettiness of her ambitions. It is as if she believes that her star power entitles her to override any collaborative process, even if it means alienating everyone around her. In a desperate bid to shift blame from her own authoritarianism, Blake clings to the notion of a cultural clash as a shield against criticism. She pretends that Baldoni's behavior, rooted in his Baha'i faith and expressed through simple acts of warmth, is being unfairly misconstrued as harassment. This shallow narrative is nothing but a feeble attempt to mask her own aggressive tactics. Rather than admitting that her overbearing control on set was the real issue, she deflects by claiming that cultural differences are to blame, a transparent ruse to cover up her self-serving agenda. Blake Lively's portrayal of the slow dance scene is nothing but a desperate attempt to rewrite history. She accused Justin Baldoni of adding unapproved intimate gestures during filming by leaning in, kissing her forehead, and caressing her without her consent. However, video evidence clearly contradicts her account, showing her actively engaging in the scene and even initiating some of the actions she now claims were forced. Baldoni's team maintains that the scene was always meant to be intimate, a genuine portrayal of mutual attraction rather than a case of unwanted advances. Adding fuel to the fire, The Hollywood Reporter paraded an expert who, conveniently, was not even present on set, casting further doubt on Blake's distorted narrative. Critics argue that her attempt to rewrite history is simply an effort to strengthen her case with fabricated details and selective editing, and embarrassingly distort facts. Adding further complexity to this debacle, reports suggest that Jenny Slate has allegedly filed an HR complaint against Baldoni. Although the exact details of her grievance remain shrouded in silence, insiders speculate that her complaint might align with Lively's claims of on-set discomfort. Some argue that her allegations support the narrative of a hostile working environment, while others contend that her complaint is entirely unrelated to the main legal battle. If her complaint proves to be connected, it could add significant weight to an already fragile case built on shaky foundations. Yet, Jenny Slate's persistent silence only amplifies the ambiguity. leaving everyone questioning the true extent of the discomfort on set. Her potential testimony, if it ever surfaces, could be pivotal in exposing the reality behind Lively's exaggerated claims, further undermining the credibility of her entire narrative. This unresolved mystery casts a shadow over the legitimacy of her entire legal strategy. The controversy deepens as Blake Lively frames this entire debacle as a feminist battle against workplace misconduct. She clings to the #MeToo movement as a shield to deflect attention from her own inconsistencies, painting herself as a victim of a systemic problem. In stark contrast, Baldoni's team argues that his actions were grossly misinterpreted rather than inherently predatory, reflecting a natural expression of his cultural and emotional openness.
You're the one who constantly is trying to take control. Either.
This clash has reignited fierce debates about gender power dynamics in Hollywood, with some accusing Lively of exploiting a noble cause for personal gain. Critics warn that her false accusations risk undermining real victims of harassment and could set a perilous precedent for future workplace disputes. The entire narrative is a tangled mess that serves only to obscure the truth and distort genuine discourse on consent and respect, which further confounds public perception. Blake's attempt to use the slow dance scene as evidence of impropriety is a transparent maneuver meant to distract from her own shortcomings. By accusing Baldoni of unapproved intimate gestures, she not only distorts what was a consensual, scripted moment, but also attempts to cast herself as a victim of misconduct. The fact that video evidence shows her engaging willingly in the scene completely undermines her claim of non-consent. Baldoni's team, armed with clear and consistent evidence, insists that the scene was intended to be intimate from the outset. Furthermore, the so-called expert, touted by The Hollywood Reporter, is nothing more than a puppet designed to lend unwarranted credibility to her narrative, despite having no real knowledge of the events on set. Moreover, the entire episode reveals a pattern of manipulation that undermines any claim to genuine concern for workplace ethics. Lively's insistence on portraying herself as a victim, while simultaneously ignoring the overwhelming evidence that contradicts her version of events, exposes her as nothing more than a master of deceit. Her fabricated narrative, bolstered by selective editing and misrepresentation of facts, is a desperate bid to cling to relevance in a landscape that demands accountability. So, if you want to stay on top of this train wreck, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because we're all over this case, twice a day, every day.